Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
In this week's Parashat V'etchanan, we continue our preparations for the community to enter the land of Israel. Moses is deeply disappointed that he'll not be able to see the land. He tells the people that they must behave in a certain manner after they've crossed into the land of Israel. He even warns the people that they may become corrupt and even end up scattered among the nations. Finally, Moses shares the Ten Commandments again. While we believe that the book of Deuteronomy is sort of a summary, it's striking that our most important laws are not repeated verbatim. It certainly feels as though the first version in Shemot is a direct quote from God, but this version in Dvarim is more of a summary or creative license on behalf of Moses. It turns out Ibn Ezra, a biblical commentator and philosopher of the Middle Ages, agrees with me. Well, maybe I should say I agree with him. For example, the law of Shabbat, as we discussed earlier. The version in Exodus states to remember Shabbat, but the Deuteronomy version says to keep Shabbat. On the one hand, that may not feel that different, but to me, one could argue that remembering to do something and actually doing the action of keeping Shabbat might look very different. One almost feels passive to remember it, but not to have to perform the act, and another more active by having to actually do the mitzvot associated with Shabbat. Ibn Ezra suggests that we have to remember there's a certain style to biblical language, a poetic method to the words and terms used. So while the words are different, we may have to look at the soul or meaning of the word and not the direct body of the word. He also had a theory that the Bible might change as the words are repeated, and therefore minor changes are not considered changes to the specific meaning. Some might even consider Ibn Ezra as one of the first scholars to recognize the Torah as having more than one author, much like the documentary hypothesis formerly addressed. The documentary hypothesis, which was most notably associated with German scholar Julius Wellhausen, explained how the 5 books of the Torah were not all written by the same one author. With this theory, the differences are easier to justify. The Exodus version of the Ten Commandments was authored by the Yahwists around 850 BCE, which preferred to use the Yud-He-Vav-He title for God, while the Deuteronomy version was authored by the Deuteronomy source from 621 BCE. Each of these authors were seen to have different methods for referring to God, and therefore the different methods for how God might be perceived through God's laws, like the Ten Commandments. Now, we might understand the reason for these differences in the Ten Commandments. But then we might ask, why read it now? Why is it important that this Parsha is read on the first Shabbat after Tisha B'Av? I believe it's a reminder post-destruction of the temple that the 10 most critical laws of Judaism have nothing to do with the temple or the laws that were associated with them. Even as we mourn the loss of the temple on Tisha B'Av, it's almost as if we are then being reminded that we don't need a place for sacrifice to know we are behaving according to our religion's most important mitzvot. Finally, I feel we're a people who seek comfort in order and rules. So, following our most solemn of days, it's fitting that this Parsha shares some rules and creates some order. In a time when we feel like we have very little rules or order in this world, I appreciate that we can be reminded of fundamental laws that should be easy to follow and comforting, even for some of us type A personalities. Shabbat Shalom.